Kate, the Future Queen, by Katie Nicholl. Chapter 11. Mr. and Mrs. Wales. It was just after 6 a.m. and the morning sunshine streamed through the sash windows of the royal suite of the Goring Hotel, where Kate had spent her last night as a single woman. Outside, a lone road sweeper brushed the street clean while Union Jack-themed bunting fluttered on the police barriers that ran the length of Beeston Place in central London. Several photographers with long lenses and ladders were setting up their equipment on the pavement. Hundreds of well-wishers had waited for hours the previous afternoon to greet Kate as she arrived at the hotel with her mother and sister from lunch with Camilla at Clarence House. There had been cries of good luck and enjoy your big day, as cameras and smartphones were held high in the air for a final picture of Kate before she emerged the next morning as a royal bride. The Queen had offered Kate a suite of rooms at Buckingham Palace on the eve of her wedding, but she had politely declined, preferring to be with her family. Her parents had organized a bridal dinner, and Kate was grateful for the chance to catch up with old family friends, some of whom she had not seen for several years. It had been a special evening, and Prince Harry, who had been dining with his brother and father at Clarence House, joined the party for a nightcap. Kate had retired to bed before 11 p.m. joking that she needed her beauty sleep, although she knew she would not be likely to sleep a wink. William, who like all grooms was not allowed to see his bride until the ceremony, had gone on an impromptu walkabout to meet the crowds outside Clarence House at 8:30 p.m. with his brother. The crowds had stayed, cheering the groom and singing for his "A Jolly Good Fellow" long into the night, and William had heard them from his bedroom window, sleep eluding him, too. They were singing and cheering all night long, so the excitement of that, the nervousness of me, and everyone singing, I slept for about half an hour, he recalled. Kate decided not to turn on the television. The news channels were devoting almost all their coverage to the wedding day, not a calming prospect for an already nervous bride. Neither was the prototype of Queen Victoria's wedding dress, which usually formed the centerpiece of the royal suite in a glass-fronted wardrobe next to the four-poster bed. The gown had been removed, and in its place, Kate's wedding dress was hanging on a mannequin made exactly to fit her measurements. The layers of Duchess satin and hand-embroidered lace were a work of art. Kate had worked closely with Sarah Burton, the head designer at Alexander McQueen, overseeing every stage of the creative process. The ivory satin bodice was slightly padded at the hips to accentuate Kate's waist and give the dress a Victorian feel, and hand-embroidered flowers had been stitched into the skirt. Sarah Burton had sneaked into the hotel for a final check the night before the wedding, wearing a hood over her head so that the waiting cameras could not get a clear shot of her. Kate glanced at the day's itinerary. In less than half an hour, the hairdressers, 8 of them, from the Richard Ward Salon in Chelsea were due to arrive to start working on the bridal party. It was strangely quiet as we drove through the city, remembered James Price. We could see the police setting up the balustrades, and as we pulled up at the Goring Hotel, I saw that an awning had been erected over the entrance. The road was then closed off, and by that point, the paparazzi were all in place. We started working on the aunts and uncles and the rest of the bridal party while Kate got ready. Royal brides traditionally have flower girls, but Kate had wanted bridesmaids, and the couple had chosen 4, William's cousin Lady Louise Windsor, the Earl and Countess of Wessex's 7-year-old daughter, William's 3-year-old goddaughter, Grace Van Cutsum, the daughter of his friend Hugh Van Cutsum, and Rose Aestia, Eliza Lopez, Camilla's 3-year-old granddaughter, and Margarita Armstrong-Jones, the Queen's nephew Viscount Linley's 8-year-old daughter. They were all placed under the charge of Pippa, the bridesmaid of honor. They had also chosen 2 page boys, William Lowther Pinkerton, the 10-year-old son of William's private secretary, and Tom Pettifer, his former nanny Tiggy Legbook's 8-year-old son. A suite had been designated for hair and makeup, and by 8:30 a.m. Kate was ready for Mr. Ward and Mr. Price to start work. Although Pippa and Carol had professional makeup artists, Kate preferred to do her own in the privacy of her dressing room. Her smoky eye makeup was her trademark look, and she expertly applied her kohl pencil and shaped her brows. She was grateful to have a professional on hand to give her a touch-up so that she looked flawless for the cameras, but Kate was determined to look like herself. Having been given the choice of 3 tiaras from the Queen's personal collection, she opted for the delicate and ornate halo tiara that had been commissioned by George VI in 1936 for the Queen Mother, who then passed it on to the Queen as an 18th birthday present. The hairdressers worked through a checklist as they created the demi-chignon, half-up, half-down hairstyle. I had a sheet with instructions on and ticked the list off one by one while James worked on the hair, said Richard Ward. According to James Price, the most complicated part was securing the tiara. We backcombed the top to create a foundation for the tiara to sit around, then did a tiny plait in the middle and sewed the tiara on. Richard and I were both just chatting to her. Kate didn't want TVs on and we didn't talk about the wedding. This was about Kate being in her own space and we couldn't hear the noise from the street or anything. With her tiara in place, Kate went to another room to get into her dress. It took about 45 minutes, recalled James Price. She was in her room, and I knocked on her door and went in. She was standing in her dress with Sarah and a few assistants working on her. I was like, wow, you look amazing. It was all too much to take in. Once I'd checked her hair over and made sure the tiara was secure, she left the room. I could hear the roar from the crowd as she left with her father. William and Harry had left Clarence House shortly after 10 a.m. in a chauffeur-driven Bentley State limousine. Dressed in the bright scarlet uniform and cap of the Colonel of the Irish Guards, a title the Queen bestowed on William just before the wedding, the groom and his best man, who was dressed in his heavy ceremonial blues and royals uniform, looked resplendent. There were cheers and shouts from the crowds who stood behind the police barriers. A major security operation had been taking place for weeks leading up to the wedding day. Sewers and lampposts, traffic lights and public trash cans had been inspected, and manholes had been uncovered, leaving nothing to chance. The wedding day was a prime target for a terrorist attack, as well as the British royal family. There were 50 foreign heads of state attending and senior members of government, along with celebrities. The city had been on a constant terror threat alert since the London bombings in July 2005. There were also fears of Republican demonstrations. The wedding was reported to be costing $30 million, and the security bill alone, which would be met by the taxpayers, was close to $8 million. But as the royal brothers drove slowly down Horse Guards Parade that morning, the only chants from the flag-waving masses were celebratory. Stepping out of the car, they turned to wave to the thousands of people who lined the streets. Entering Westminster Abbey, they were greeted by the Dean of Westminster, and as they walked up the aisle together to await the bride, 40 minutes before she was due to arrive, it was impossible not to imagine how proud William and Harry's mother would have been. William seemed excited, though his habit of wiping his palms and clenching his jaw gave away his nerves. Sweat pads had been stitched into his heavy jacket to help him stay cool. At one point Harry made a quip, and William visibly relaxed and went to chat with his mother's side of the family, the Spencers, who had been given a front-row pew in the Abbey. The church held many memories for the family, particularly William's soon-to-be-married uncle, Diana's brother Earl Spencer, who had delivered his now famous and moving eulogy at the princess's funeral in the very same church. It had been agreed that William and Harry would wait in the chapel of St. Edward the Confessor, which is separated from the high altar by a gilded screen, and was where the Abbey's marriage registers would be signed at the end of the wedding service. The chapel, which houses the shrine of St. Edward, is the burial site of medieval kings and queens. The great stone tombs would have been enough to send shivers down William's spine, but he was relieved to be away from the buzzing congregation and the TV screens that had been erected in the abbey so that everyone could see what was happening at the high altar. The congregation had been gathering since 8:45 a.m., and every one of the guests had to go through rigorous security checks. As well as being scanned by metal detectors, they had been asked not to take photographs in the church and to arrive in plenty of time so that they could be seated before the VIPs arrived. Given that this was a royal wedding, there was a hierarchy among the guests, and celebrities were at the bottom of the pecking order. Surprisingly, there was no seating plan in the nave, where most of the congregation was assigned pews. Among the sea of brightly colored outfits and designer hats were a number of familiar faces. David Beckham, who had worked with William on England's unsuccessful bid for the Soccer World Cup, was proudly sporting his Order of the British Empire, and his heavily pregnant wife, Victoria Beckham, showcased a navy dress from her latest collection. The film director Guy Ritchie, who, the week before the wedding, had been revealed as a distant cousin of Kate's, arrived with his wife. Kate and William had also invited Joss Stone, whom they had gotten to know after she sang at the Diana Memorial Concert. Sir Elton John, who seemed to be struggling with the heat from the overhead lights, was accompanied by his husband. Tara Palmer Tompkinson, an old family friend, caused a stir by dressing head to toe in electric blue. There was much pointing and waving, greeting and air-kissing while everyone kept an eye on the Great West Door to see who would arrive next. The Prime Minister and senior cabinet ministers had been instructed to take their pews ahead of the visiting heads of state and foreign royals, and they were seated in the stalls behind the choir, whereas Prime Minister David Cameron was appropriately attired in his morning suit. His wife, Samantha, attracted some criticism from television commentators for choosing not to wear a hat. She was an anomaly, as most of the well-turned-out guests had heeded the formal dress code and opted for hats. Certainly, the visiting royals and the extended members of the British royal family did not disappoint in the hat department. They knew what was expected of a royal wedding, and as they piled out of the minibuses, which had escorted them from Buckingham Palace, there was an explosion of colour, feathers, and netting. William's cousin Zara Phillips, who arrived with her fiancé, rugby player Mike Tindall, had opted for an oversized black hat that she struggled with as she stepped out of the rather unglamorous coach. Princess Beatrice, who was driven in a car with her sister, at the insistence of their father, Prince Andrew, had taken a risk with an extraordinary creation by milliner Philip Tracy, which was picked to pieces by the fashion brigade watching with eagle eyes and commenting live on the arrivals. With its bizarre and complex loops and tentacle-like flourishes, it was compared to an octopus and a giant pretzel. The sight of kings and queens descending en masse from silver buses was something to behold, but they didn't appear to mind, and as they took their seats in the north and south stalls, they, together with crown princes and princesses, earls and countesses, sheiks and sultans of countries around the world, found themselves seated with many young guests. Over 1,000 of the 1,900-strong congregation were William and Kate's friends, and they had been seated in prime pews. These were friends from all aspects of their past and present, including childhood friends, school friends, university friends, and colleagues from work. There were girlfriends and boyfriends from their past, among them William's first love, Rose Farquhar, Arabella Musgrave and Jekka Craig, as well as Kate's ex-boyfriend from St Andrews, Rupert Finch, and Harry Blakelock, the boy who had broken her heart when she was a schoolgirl. Kate had invited a significant contingent from Marlborough, including Amelia and Alice and their old headmaster, Edward Gould. Clearly fond of some of her former teachers, she had also included David G., her favourite mathematics teacher at St Andrews Prep, as well as her former headmasters, Robert Aitchison and Jeremy Snow, who were all surprised to be seated alongside royals, representatives of the church, and members of the cabinet. The mother of the bride arrived with James shortly after the crowned heads of state and, as protocol required, before Charles and Camilla, and Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. Dressed in a pale sky blue Catherine Walker dress suit, Carol looked youthful and elegant as she smiled at some of the faces she recognized in the congregation. On the arm of her only son, she made her way to the high altar, followed at a discreet distance by the family's bodyguard, Bond Gunning. The Middletons' guests were seated in the north lantern and had clear views of the sacrarium, where the couple would exchange their vows. This was a wedding in which everyone was to be treated as equals, so seated immediately opposite the royal family were Michael's brothers, nieces, and nephews, along with some cousins and Carol's elderly cousin Jean. "I was the only member of Carol's side of the family to be invited," said Mrs. Harrison. "It was one of the most special days of my life and quite an incredible experience to be sitting in the Abbey with so many people. I felt truly honored." Carol and Michael's guest list included trusted and loyal friends who had touched their lives over the years. There were also more recent friends from Mustique, among them their yoga teacher, Gregory Allen, and his partner, Elizabeth Saint, the island's tennis coach, Richard Schaefer, and Basil Charles, the owner of Basil's Bar. Carol's brother, Gary, had a second-row seat with his 8-year-old daughter, Tallulah, and his ex-wife, Luan. Dressed in top hat and tails, he was the model of discretion and generously swapped seats with Camilla's daughter, Laura, so that she could have a better view of her daughter walking in the bridal procession. Carol and Michael had not forgotten the loyalty of the residents and shopkeepers in Bucklebury who had protected them from the media and respected their privacy during Kate and William's courtship. The local pub landlord, along with the postman and the village butcher, Martin Fiddler, were all seated. It was amazing to be invited. "My wife and I have known Carol since she was a young single woman," said Mr. Fiddler. "We have seen her married and watched the children grow up, and to see Catherine walk up the aisle was so very special. We had a good position in the Abbey, which made us feel even more touched. We had amazing views and could see everything. The earlier you got there, the better seats you got, because there wasn't a seating plan." Carol and Michael coped brilliantly with the pressure, they all did. Mike looked like the proudest man in the world walking up the aisle, and Carol looked stunning, and I remember thinking how composed she was. I imagine there were lots of nerves, and possibly a stiff drink before the service. Charles and Camilla, dressed in a pretty pale blue dress, were the last members of the royal family to arrive, ahead of the Queen and Prince Philip. Pristine in his Royal Navy No. 1 dress outfit, Charles was greeted by the Dean of Westminster and made sure that everything was in place ahead of the bride's arrival. The crowds roared their approval as the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh pulled up at the Abbey and a trumpet fanfare sounded. The Queen, who had just celebrated her 85th birthday, was dressed in a dazzling primrose yellow dress that reflected the spirit of the nation and the unexpected spring sunshine. According to courtiers, she had been in a joyful mood for days. She is known to love weddings and was delighted that her grandson was now settling down with the woman he loved. The courtiers said she was practically skipping with joy before she departed the palace. To the rousing March from the Birds by Charles Hastings Parry, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh made their stately walk down the red carpet and up to the high altar, led by Charles and Camilla. It was quite a moment in history, Charles walking with the woman he had always loved, in the very same place where Diana's funeral had taken place. It was a scene that many, Charles included, believed might never happen. As Prince Philip walked alongside the Queen, it must have brought back memories of their own wedding day 64 years earlier in this, the most holy and sacred abbey in the kingdom. The congregation fell silent as the Queen took her place in the front pew. At exactly 10:50 a.m. Kate and her father stepped out of the Goring Hotel. The awning over the threshold made it impossible to see the wedding dress in full. There was a glimpse of lace and plenty of train, 6.5 feet, in fact, which had to be carefully piled into the waiting Rolls-Royce Phantom. At one point, Michael seemed to be buried in tulle, causing Kate to giggle. She wanted some pictures of this special moment and asked her friend Millie Pilkington, a professional photographer who has known the family for years, to climb into the front seat and take some photographs. As father and daughter passed Buckingham Palace and headed down the Mall to Horse Guards Parade, they waved at the crowds, a sea of red, white, and blue that stretched as far as they could see. Michael took his daughter's hand and turned to smile at her. The eyes of the world were upon them, but in the backseat of the glass-roofed Rolls-Royce, it was just Kate and her father sharing a very special moment. Like any other proud father, this was a moment of huge significance in his life, the first of his children's weddings. The car pulled up in front of the Great West Door and Kate stepped out onto the red carpet, her train unfolding like a flower behind her. The collective cheer prompted a smile from the radiant bride. Some of the spectators had camped out for several nights to secure their front row positions, and this was the moment they had been waiting for. In her glittering tiara and ivory and white satin gown, she looked every inch a princess. The train was regal, modest, and incredibly beautiful. The antique Chantilly and English lace bodice that was nipped in at the waist was exquisite, and the dipped neckline a touch daring, but entirely elegant. Commentators compared the gown to Grace Kelly's wedding dress, and only at that moment was it revealed by the palace that the designer was Sarah Burton. The news was met with much excitement. Burton was one of Britain's most exciting designers at one of the country's most famous fashion houses, and it was seen as a poignant tribute to Alexander McQueen, who had committed suicide a year earlier. Kate had scored an ace. Her dress was traditional yet contemporary, timeless but fashion-forward. Fashion editors commended the design as inspired and perfect. Kate smiled at Pippa, who told her she looked beautiful. So did Pippa. Kate had wanted her younger sister to dress in white, and the fitted bias-cut gown, also designed by Sarah Burton, with its scooped neckline, suggestion of cleavage, and tease of buttons down the back to her bottom, was almost as sensational as Kate's wedding dress. It was typical of Kate's generosity and her self-confidence not only to dress her sister in white, but also to want her to wear such a stunning gown. While Pippa tended to the train, Kate turned around to face the crowds. One day the British people would be her subjects. It was the same thought that had struck Diana, who had paused and waved to the nation, as was expected of royal brides, before she climbed the stairs of St. Paul's Cathedral. But while Diana had seemed full of trepidation, Kate, who was older and more experienced in her role as a royal consort, exuded an amazing sense of confidence and purpose. They were both royal brides, but Kate and Diana, for all the comparisons, were two very different women. As Pippa made sure every pleat was in place, the little flower girls checked their floral headdresses and held on to their white rose bouquets. The pages, grinning proudly, took their positions at the back of the bridal procession. Inside the Abbey, Sarah Burton and James Price were on hand to make any final adjustments. Finally, the church bells that had been tolling since the bridegroom's arrival ceased, and the London Chamber Orchestra played the first chords of Charles Parry's I Was Glad. The music filled the great church with the spirit of the occasion. There was a collective gasp as Kate entered the Abbey. I looked up and saw this beautiful silhouette. It was the most special moment, recalled James Price. Watching her walk up the Abbey was just magical. She glided and was breathtakingly beautiful. William kept his eyes fixed firmly on the altar, but Prince Harry couldn't resist turning around. "She's here. Just wait till you see her," he said, grinning. Walking slowly past the avenue of English maple trees and exquisite displays of her favorite lily of the valley, Kate breathed in the sweet scent, remembering to stay calm and focused on the moment. Arms linked with her father, they both kept their gazes fixed ahead as they walked the 318 feet to the high altar. This was Kate's final journey as a middle-class girl. She would leave the abbey a future queen. When she reached the altar, William finally turned to face his bride. His eyes widened. "You look beautiful," he exclaimed. Sensing Michael's nervousness, he cracked a joke. "We're supposed to have just a small family affair," he whispered to his soon-to-be father-in-law. With everyone in place, the organ ceased and the congregation fell silent as the service began. It was traditional and beautiful, in keeping with the Anglican faith, and punctuated with the couple's chosen hymns, including a Jerusalem, one of Princess Diana's favorites. There were nods of encouragement and grins of sheer pleasure between William and Kate, the gentle brushing of hands, and at one point a wink of encouragement. William had opted not to wear a wedding ring, and as he presented Kate with hers, a simple band made from a piece of Welsh gold that the Queen had given them as an engagement present, he appeared to struggle to get it on, prompting nervous glances from the congregation and a reassuring smile from Kate. When she spoke, her voice was clear and audible. Nerves had gotten the better of Diana, who had muddled Charles's names, but Kate managed William Arthur Philip Louis in crystal-clear tones. As they exchanged their vows, their eyes locked. There at the high altar, it really was just the two of them. Amid all the preparations, pomp, and pageantry here, in the House of Kings, where 37 kings and queens had been invested since William the Conqueror was crowned on Christmas Day, the union of the future King and Queen of England was taking place. This was living history, and the wedding, which would be replayed many, many times over the years, was a reminder of the power of the monarchy and the love the country felt for its great and unique establishment. This was a landmark within the century, a marriage that would secure the 1,000-year-old lineage of the House of Windsor and move it forward. History was being made, and the future of the monarchy seemed destined to succeed with William and Kate, a perfectly suited bride and groom, pledging their love and commitment to one another in the presence of God. The vows were traditional, but Kate, the modern bride amid so much tradition, chose not to obey but to love, comfort, honor, and keep. They had discussed their vows with the Archbishop of Canterbury, who counseled them in the months leading up to the wedding, and both William and Kate agreed they would prefer not to obey, which somehow seemed so incompatible with the equality on which their relationship was founded. Upon the bride's "I will," there was a collective cheer up and down the country and around the world. Close to 2 billion people were watching the ceremony on television, and across the Atlantic many Americans had woken at dawn to witness the couple exchange their vows. On the other side of the world in Sydney, all-night parties were already in full swing to celebrate the royal union. The couple's choice of lesson from Romans 12, delivered by Kate's brother, James, highlighted the virtues of self-sacrifice, modesty, honesty, and leadership. It was the only reading during the service, and James, who had suffered from dyslexia throughout his life, had learned the verses by heart. The Bishop of London gave a sermon in which he described marriage as a hope in troubled times. He asked the congregation, and the rest of the world, to pray for the couple, adding, "It is good that people in every continent are able to share in these celebrations, because this is, as every wedding day should be, a day of hope." It was, he reminded them, the festival of St. Catherine of Siena, and touchingly, he spoke of the family that he hoped would bless the couple. He ended his address with a prayer the couple had written themselves in which they thanked God for their families, and for the love that we share, and for the joy of our marriage. Once the Dean of Westminster had blessed the couple, the congregation burst into God Save the Queen, and the bride and groom were led to the chapel of St. Edward the Confessor to sign the register, away from the television cameras. As William took his bride's hand to leave the abbey as man and wife, the London Chamber Orchestra played William Walton's magnificent Crown Imperial. Kate, now a future queen, curtsied deeply to the reigning monarch. "Amazing, Queen Elizabeth II declared of the wedding afterward, her single word summing up the mood of the nation. Outside the great west door, the open-topped state landau carriage stood gleaming in the April sunshine, as William and Kate stepped into the very same horse-drawn carriage that had taken Charles and Diana back to the palace after their wedding nearly 30 years earlier. Kate turned to William. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Amazing, amazing," replied William. "I am so proud you're my wife," he replied, according to one of several lip readers who had been tasked with relaying the asides that day. It was a touching moment that perfectly summed up why William adored her. Whereas he was used to all the fanfare, Kate was not, yet her instinct was to ask him if he was happy. He was always her first thought. Thousands of servicemen and women lined the route back to Buckingham Palace. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen, among them some of William's colleagues from the RAF, each had a part to play. The palace gates. It's mad, William repeated to his bride as he looked out at the forest of upturned flags and past the temporary media village that had been constructed at Canada Gate for the thousands of journalists who were covering the event. The couple was genuinely touched by the public support in advance of the wedding, which they had described as incredibly moving, and now, looking at the throngs of people lining the streets, they could only marvel at the loyalty and joy of the British people. In front of the famous balcony that looks onto the gleaming Queen Victoria Memorial, the crowds waited and waited, their cameras fixed on the very same spot where Prince Charles had kissed Diana. Years later, the Duke of York and Sarah Ferguson had followed suit, making the royal kiss something of a tradition. When William led his bride out through the glass doors and onto the balcony at 1:25 p.m., the noise was deafening as the crowds clapped and cheered for what seemed like an eternity. "Kiss, kiss, kiss," they chanted. "Oh wow," said Kate, who appeared deeply moved by the spectacle. As the bridesmaids and pages, as well as the couple's families, followed onto the balcony, the roar grew into a crescendo. Carol and Michael stood next to Charles and Camilla and waved, not quite believing the sight before them. Pippa said something that made the Duke of Edinburgh smile, while Harry chatted with James. The Queen stood with her hands behind her back, surveying her subjects and beaming broadly. William and Kate waved. They knew what the crowd was cheering for, and finally, William turned to kiss Kate. It was more of a peck than a kiss, and the crowd cheered for more. William grinned. "Let's give them another one." "I love you," he said as a Lancaster, a Spitfire, and a Hurricane thundered overhead. This time the kiss was longer and the crowd louder, so much so that little Grace Van Cutsum cupped her hands to her ears as she looked down rather grumpily. The Queen took this as a cue to leave and was followed by her family. William and Kate were the last to leave, Kate glancing over her shoulder to bid the crowd one final wave goodbye. Inside, the 650 guests who had been invited to the champagne reception were served canapés. Many of the guests were on the other side of the palace and couldn't actually see what was happening on the balcony, so they watched on televisions, recalled Lady Elizabeth Anson. William and Kate spent close to an hour greeting their guests, some of whom they had never met before. Along with the ceremony, this was the formal part of the day, and the newlyweds were required to meet the heads of the Commonwealth and the visiting royal families. After the cutting of the cake, a traditional two-tiered fruitcake adorned with English roses, Scottish thistles, Welsh daffodils, and the Irish shamrock, made by the British cake maker Fiona Cairns, Charles gave a short speech in the picture gallery, against the backdrop of one of the world's greatest collection of old masters. He welcomed his daughter-in-law into the family, telling guests, "We are lucky to have her." He also reminisced about William's childhood, saying, "It feels like only yesterday I was building houses out of chairs in the living room for William. On one occasion I bought a pedal car for him so he could drive around the garden." I told him he could drive around the old cedar tree, but he must not bump into the cedar tree. William drove round once, twice, and then crashed into the cedar tree. Well, that was the end of the pedal car. Unable to resist poking fun at his elder son, he also cracked a joke about William's thinning hairline. William, who took to the stage briefly to thank everyone for coming, retaliated with a joke about his father's expanding waistline. There was much merriment and laughter, and a toast to the bride and groom's happiness. Carol and Michael mingled easily with the guests and seemed impressively relaxed with their new in-laws. The Queen had invited them for lunch at Windsor Castle the week before the wedding so that there would be no awkwardness on the big day, and according to courtiers, the date had been a resounding success. Touchingly, William introduced Kate as a Mrs. Wales when he addressed the wedding party, even though the couple was now officially the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, titles bestowed on them by the Queen that morning as a wedding gift. Prince William had changed into a more comfortable military coat, and he was laughing. It was rather wonderful. They had managed to have what felt like a family wedding in a most extraordinary setting, recalled Lady Elizabeth Anson. Prince Charles's speech was very warm and loving and very funny. The reception was remarkably relaxed and really felt like a family affair. By 3:30 p.m., guests were asked to make their way to the garden to wave the couple off. William had asked his father if he could borrow his treasured blue Aston Martin Volante, Charles's 21st birthday present from the Queen, to drive down the Mall to Clarence House. The car had been polished for the occasion, and much to William and Kate's surprise, Harry had it decked out with Ella plates, a Ju 5T WED registration plate, and W&C themed balloons. For good measure, a Sea King helicopter swooped down from the sky to escort them home. For the prince, there was something symbolic about driving his wife home, even if in the excitement of it all, he had forgotten to release the emergency brake. Back at the palace, the couple couldn't wait to run through the events of the day together. Careful not to crush her bridal gown, Kate changed into a fluffy terry cloth robe and they jumped like excited children onto the bed. They had recorded the televised ceremony and couldn't wait to watch it on playback. Harry joined them, and the three of them sat watching together. Kate was still wearing the Queen's priceless tiara. It was lovely to see them so relaxed and happy. You could see how excited and in love they were, said James Price, who arrived at the palace to arrange Kate's hair for the evening. Kate was still wearing her tiara in the evening. We took it out and blow-dried her hair. Sarah Burton had created a second dress for Kate for the evening reception, a strapless floor-length ivory satin gown with a diamond sash. Teamed a white Angora wool bolero to ward off the evening chill, Kate looked every inch a fairy tale princess. This was the part of the day they were most looking forward to, a sit-down dinner with 300 of their friends and family, and a party that would go on until dawn. The Queen and Prince Philip had already left the palace by the time the couple's guests arrived. William's cousins Zara and Peter Phillips, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, and Earl Spencer's daughters, Kitty, Amelia, and Eliza, were among the first to be driven into the courtyard at 7 p.m. They were greeted by bagpipers in the candlelit courtyard and taken through to the champagne reception. Carol and Michael, who had gone back to the Goring Hotel to see their guests after the wedding reception, had changed into their party clothes, as had Pippa, who had caused quite a sensation in her figure-hugging bridesmaid gown. Unbeknownst to her, she was now a global superstar, her name was trending on Twitter, and by the end of the day, Facebook groups dedicated to her derriere had thousands of followers. People wanted to know all about Kate's younger sister and how close she was to Prince Harry. The cameras had picked up on them leaving the Abbey arm in arm and later, sharing asides on the palace balcony. In fact, Pippa's date for the wedding day was her boyfriend of nearly a year, a handsome former Etonian and city financier, Alex Loudon, who had quietly become an intimate addition to the Middleton fold. After vintage rose champagne from the palace cellars, dinner was served at 8 p.m. At Kate's request, the room had been lit by hundreds of candles and every table set with 19th-century solid gold plates and cutlery dating back to the reign of King George III. The couple had named the tables, which were adorned with white roses, after some of their favourite places, among them St Andrews, Lure Downs, Roscollin, one of their favourite villages in Anglesey, and Tetbury, the Gloucestershire village near Highgrove. They had spent hours on the seating plans and deliberately mixed up their friends and family so that everyone could get to know each other. The supper menu, created by one of William and Kate's favourite chefs, Anton Mosselman, comprised organically sourced crab from Wales, lamb from Highgrove, and a trio of miniature trifle, chocolate fondant, and homemade ice cream. Charles had helped to select the white Meursault Burgundy and Pomerol Claret. Shortly after 9:30 p.m., once coffee and petits fours had been served, Harry, who was acting as master of ceremonies, switched roles to deliver a hilarious best man speech. Adorning a fez, he recounted how he and William played soldiers as little boys, a game that always ended with him being beaten up by his older brother. There were jokes about William's bald patch and his long-standing inability to keep up with Harry during drinking games. Referring to the newlyweds as the Dude and the Duchess, he said, William didn't have a romantic bone in his body before he met Kate. A great mimic, Harry impersonated his brother, calling Kate baby to much laughter, but the mood changed when he spoke movingly of his love for his sister-in-law and how lucky his brother was to have found a woman who loved him unconditionally. Chelsea, who was back together with Harry and was sitting at the next table, looked momentarily downcast, while Kate brushed away a tear or two. There were more tears when William stood up and described Kate as his rock, and said how much his mother would have loved her. There were tears of laughter as Michael recalled the unforgettable moment when William landed his Chinook in the back garden. I knew things were getting serious when I found a helicopter in my garden. I thought, gosh, he must like my daughter. I did wonder how William was ever going to top this if they ever got engaged. I just thought, what will he do? You can't get much better than that. And we are certainly not used to princes landing helicopters in the garden. He credited his beautiful daughter for her nerve and steadiness as they walked down the aisle and thanked the royal family for welcoming his family so warmly. There was more laughter when William's two best school friends, Thomas Van Straubenzee and James Mead, delivered a witty sketch about the prince, including references to his wild partying and the drunken occasion during which he wore a lady's thong. There were jokes about the fact that Kate beat William at everything, especially sports. Then, when the speeches came to an end, Harry announced that all the guests were to make their way to the throne room for the surprise that he and Pippa had been planning for weeks. It was perhaps just as well that the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh were not there. The priceless chandeliers had been covered up and in their place were strobe lights, glitter balls, and a giant dance floor, which dominated the 120-foot-long room. The dais, where the thrones usually had pride of place, had been replaced by a disco booth and a cocktail bar. Pippa had arranged for the room to be scented with Kate's favourite candles and for bowls of Haribo candies to be placed on the surrounding tables. The bar served a variety of drinks, including Boovis-inspired crack baby cocktails, a blend of champagne, vodka, passion fruit, and Chambord raspberry liqueur. William and Kate had been involved with the music and had asked the British singer Ellie Goulding to perform her chart-topping song Starry-Eyed as their first dance. It was an amazing honor to be asked. The atmosphere was incredible and it is a night I will never forget, Miss Goulding said afterward. She sang a number of covers, and Charles and Camilla took to the dance floor to her version of Elton John's Your Song. Later on, a DJ took over, and Carol requested one of her favorite songs, the 1986 Jermaine Stewart song, we don't have to take our clothes off," as she and Michael bowed out of the party, leaving William and Kate to enjoy the rest of the night with their friends. The dancing continued until 2:30 a.m., when guests were invited to the gardens for a firework display. Catherine wheels had been pinned to the trees, and the 20-second-long burst of red and white sparks could be seen from over the palace walls, although the crowds had long since dispersed. When the final rocket had soared, William and Kate were driven across the courtyard in an open-topped RAF personalized Fiat 500 to the Belgian suite, where they were to spend their wedding night. Back in the throne room, Harry declared it was time for some serious partying, and the decks were turned up for one final tune. Merry from the crack baby cocktails, Harry suddenly launched himself into the crowd. Harry literally stage dived. It was a great finale, one reveller remembered. It was certainly a party none of the guests would ever forget. Shortly before 11 a.m. the next morning, William and Kate emerged from Buckingham Palace and strolled, hand in hand, across the lawn for their first photo session as husband and wife. The sun was bright overhead, and the couple, looking remarkably fresh-faced, announced they were heading off for a private weekend. The Queen, who was in residence at Sandringham, had made Windsor Castle available to them so that they could enjoy some time alone before heading home to Anglesey, where William was due to resume work. "I am glad the weather held off. We had a great day," Kate said as she and William made their way across the courtyard to their waiting helicopter. Going home to Anglesey at the end of what was surely the best weekend of their lives must have been something of an anticlimax, but as she pushed a cart around the parking lot of the local supermarket just days after the magnificent ceremony, Kate was glowing. Dressed in leggings and a sweater, her hair flowing in the breeze, Mrs. Wales, as William had affectionately called her on their wedding day, looked like the happiest girl in the world. 11 days after their wedding, William and Kate left for their honeymoon, leaving the country as unobtrusively as they were able. William had planned the 2-week-long vacation down to the finest detail, but he had kept the destination secret from Kate. By going back to work before leaving for their honeymoon, they were able to escape, said a friend of the couple. It was a deliberate decoy. Kate had been told to pack for the sun, and it was only when they arrived at the airport that William told her they were flying to North Island in the Seychelles. It was a romantic gesture. The Seychelles was where they had made their secret pact to marry when they stayed in Des Roches, and now, for years later, they were returning as husband and wife. They flew by private jet to May, the largest island in the archipelago, and then took a helicopter to North Island, a 4-mile-long private island shaded by coconut groves and surrounded by cliffs. The exclusive North Island lodge had been booked immediately after their wedding, and William had waited for one of the luxury wooden bungalows to become available. The sensational rooms looked out onto the crystal-clear Indian Ocean and had private gardens, an outside deck where they enjoyed morning yoga sessions, their own plunge pool, and a spectacular open-air bathroom with a sunken bath that was filled with frangipani flowers each night by their private butler. Back in England, William had gone to great lengths to keep the honeymoon a secret, so he was upset when the island's owner told a Hamburg newspaper, "Yes, we rented the island to the British royal family. Prince William and his Kate are spending their honeymoon there." The news travelled around the world, and William, who was keeping a close eye on events back at home, where his grandmother was carrying out an historic trip to Ireland, knew that they would most likely be photographed now that the secret was out. Determined not to let the whereabouts of their honeymoon location spoil the holiday, William arranged champagne picnics on the beach and a sunset cruise so that they could tour the island. During the days, they relaxed on the beach, working on their tans while admiring the island's turtles. At their villa there was a butler on call for them day and night, and a private chef who cooked whatever they wanted. William had sent a list of their favorite foods ahead of their arrival, including Philadelphia cream cheese, quail eggs, Granny Smith apples, and rather surprisingly, Brussels sprouts. The latter immediately prompted rumors that Kate was trying to get pregnant. Sprouts are rich in folic acid, which is recommended for women who are trying to conceive. When the couple returned to England at the end of May, it was back to reality with a bump. The President of the United States and the First Lady were in London for a state visit, and the Queen asked William and Kate to come to Buckingham Palace to meet with them just days after they touched down on British soil. It was their first official duty as newlyweds, and the Obamas, who had not been invited to the royal wedding, were eager to meet the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. William charmed the President, while Kate and Michelle Obama instantly hit it off during the 20-minute meeting. It was a canny public relations move on the Queen's part. William and Kate were set to visit the United States the following month, and the fact that the Obamas had been dazzled was an auspicious start.